Okay, so this should be a pretty short video, and I want to explain a very important truth that um, a lot of people don't understand in how they manipulate people's beliefs by using studies which they misrepresent the data. Okay, so and one of the easiest ways to manipulate this situation is by using statistics. For example, when it comes to risk, they're using rather rather than absolute risk. Um, well, let me actually just give you some numbers. That's probably going to be easier. I've got a technical challenge here. Okay, not to worry. Okay, I've lost. I'm actually lost my video. Where the heck is it? I'm no longer looking at myself, and it's really putting me off. And I can't. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so that was putting me off for a second. So what they do is they use relative risk rather than absolute risk. Now, that may not mean too much to you, so I'm going to explain because it's really, really important. Okay, so if you saw a study, let's pretend it's on vegan diet versus omnivore diet. Just make that up. And you saw that they tested those two diets versus, let's say, heart attacks. And there was 100% increased risk among the omnivores versus the vegans. That was the conclusion, and that was the headline. That could potentially have quite a dramatic impact on your belief, right? 100%. That is a big percentage. 100% increase risk of heart attack in the one group than the other group. And if you were in the omnivore group, and especially if your doctor had told you you had a risk of heart attack, that might seriously influence you, right? Now, here's the problem with that. The probability is that the statistic they've given you is relative risk, not absolute risk. And that makes a massive difference. And I'm going to explain that so that you can understand, so that they can't so easily manipulate you. Okay, so let me give you some very simple numbers. Right, if in the one group, one person had a heart attack during the period that they were being observed, and in the other group, there were two people that had a heart attack, that would be 100% increase. Okay, that would be relative risk, 100% increase. Now, if the two groups that were looked at were 1,000,000 people each, so one person in the vegan group had a heart attack out of the 1,000,000, and two people had a heart attack in the other group, the omnivore group, out of 1,000,000. While it is 100% relative risk increase, actually your personal risk in the vegan group is 1 in 1,000,000 compared to 2 in 1,000,000 in the omnivore group. In other words, there is no statistical difference worth noting. And it could easily switch around in another study. It could be 2 in the vegan and 1 in the. It's such a small number that it is irrelevant. So absolute risk 1 or 2 in 1,000,000. Relative risk 100% difference. Can you see how they can use relative risk to completely obscure the real truth of the situation and your real risk? That is what they do all the time. They've done it a lot in the studies, so-called studies that they've done on this thing, when they've claimed effectiveness and different stuff, they're using relative risk. Now, there are other components to the deception. That's a key one. But I'll run through a couple of others as well, just so that you understand. But hopefully you can see that statistical one is absolutely deceptive, and they should never be giving relative risk in a situation like that, because it means nothing with the figures I just gave you. There might be some situations it means a little bit more, but basically no, relative risk, useless. Okay, here's another thing that they do. The two groups that they're looking at should be, apart from the difference that they're highlighting, in this case vegan and omnivore, there should be matching groups. But very often they're not. So for example, one of the things that may not match, there may be a lot more females in one of the groups than the others. Do you think that might have a play in the effect? Do women, for example, have less heart attacks than men? I'm just giving this as an example, Obviously, there's a myriad of different studies and different factors to take into account, but that's one factor. One of the groups might have an average age that's substantially older than the other group. So it might be the omnivores are 10 years older on average than the vegans, in which case you would anticipate a higher likelihood of a heart attack if it was looking for a heart attack. Another factor that may play into it may be certain lifestyles. So vegans may, on average, smoke less often than omnivores do, or drink less often than omnivores do. Okay, so all of these differences, so they're looking at the difference vegan versus omnivore, but they may not, often are not taking into account other differences. So maybe the omnivores are more obese on average than the vegans. So maybe that's a factor. Maybe the omnivores are less health conscious in general and really don't care what they eat. They eat meat, yeah, but they also eat a lot more processed foods than the vegans, who are on average more health conscious, etc. So there's all kinds of potential differences between the two groups that they either don't take into account, or worse, they pretend that they do, but you can't really know, or how all those different factors will actually make a difference. So sometimes they adjust the stats based on the differences, but that's just guesswork. But basically, you can make it up, is what they're really doing. Okay, when the groups are so different, they don't really know what difference all those factors are going to make. So they guess, and they tend to guess in line with the outcome that they want. Okay, so another thing that they sometimes do after the study is they remove some people from the study for various reasons, which may be legitimate or not. So they start with a particular number, and then after the results, they look at things and they say, as part of the adjustment, they remove different groups of people from the study, which would have had potentially a bigger effect. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that studies can be very easily manipulated and are done so on a regular basis, depending upon the agenda of those doing the study, which tends to depend on whoever's financing the study. Okay, so ultimately, it's down to the money, right? Who's financing the study and what outcome do they want? And basically, you can pretty much create any outcome you want with the manipulation of data and how you collect the data and what you ignore and what you don't ignore, etc. However, the main point that I want you to take away from this is the manipulation between relative and absolute risk. Okay, that's the big one. So when they give a percentage of increased risk, you need to know if it's a relative or an absolute statement. Because if it's relative, it's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. If it's absolute, okay, fine. That has a lot more value to you. So there you go. Hope that helped you to understand a little bit about the type of methods that they're using to manipulate opinion and change people's minds by doing studies that use statistics in a very deceptive way, and they also have a whole range of other methods that also can influence the outcome of a study, such as not balancing the comparable groups correctly, and then also adjustments that they make to try and adjust for those imbalances are another way that they can cause a lot of deceptive data. So there you go. Hope that's been helpful for you, for those of you that like studies and like looking at the results. So, one more quick thing that just come to mind. Another thing that they do, a lot of people don't really understand how to interpret a study, and what they'll do is they'll go to a study and they'll look at the conclusion of the study to let the authors of the study give them a summary of what the study means. And again, it's one of the methods that they use to manipulate you, because very often the conclusion is not matched by the data. So the data says one thing and the conclusion says something entirely different, usually whatever is wanted by the person or organization, people paying for the study. So they'll just write a conclusion that fits with what they want, even though the data does not support that conclusion. So that is another trick that they use. The headline is one of those conclusion things. So they often put something in the headline 100% increase of risk between omnivores and vegans is the headline. People don't read the study, they just think, oh, wow. Another thing that just comes to mind that they often do. So when they look at, for example, meat or milk or lots of things that there's an agenda to discredit, they will often ignore the fact that that meat or milk or whatever has been poisoned. They'll completely ignore the poisons that have been added to that food, and basically say that the meat causes cancer, ignoring the known carcinogens that have been added to the meat, as an example. So that's another trick that they use. So I could prove that water caused cancer and ignore the fact that the water was full of fluoride, which is a known carcinogen. And if I just ignored that and did studies on fluoridated water, I could show that water caused cancer. That's the kind of thing that they're doing continually. So God bless, have a great day. Hope this was helpful. If it was, let me know, give me a thumbs up, share, etc. if you found this of value. Thank you very much. Bye bye.